Hello and welcome to the Seren Stay-at-Home Series archive. Our final video features David Llewellyn in conversation with Nemonie Craven Roderick about his latest novel, A Simple Scale. We were also fortunate enough to be joined by Samuel West, who reads 3 excerpts from the book. We hope you enjoy watching it back.
Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to, it's the grand finale of the Seren Stay-at-Home series, I think, isn't it? It's Friday night, it's exciting. We're going to chat about A Simple Scale by David Llewellyn. It's a novel that I really love, having read it a good few times now. And I think it really deserved bringing to life in the way that we will enjoy tonight, because we're very lucky to have Samuel West with us to do a few readings from the novel. We'll see how much time we have for Sam to do some readings, and then we can chat a bit more about the novel after that. I can introduce David a bit more formally afterwards. We're going to have a donation tonight to the National Campaign for the Arts, and if you also follow Sam on Twitter, you can see about his pandemic poems he's been reading, and also trying to get some attention for that National Campaign for the Arts, which I think also feels like it has a connection to some of the aspects of David's novel. So let's move on swiftly to Sam's reading. I'm just going to set the scene a bit. So, A Simple Scale. A Simple Scale moves between the lives of Sol Conrad and Sergei Grekov. Sol is a composer who had worked in Hollywood composing stings and cues, working in a studio, thereafter finding success with the score for sci-fi series Battle Station Alpha. Sergei Grekov was a composer in 1930s Soviet Union whose composition for a ballet based on a hero of our time by Lermontov is banned. Where in 2000, some points in the novel, Natalie, Sol's assistant in 2001, is a student of music, and Pavel Grekov, Sergei's grandson, appears, and they become contemporary intermediaries of the entwined stories. So Seren write in their blurb, in A Simple Scale, a piece of music starts a story that will range across Soviet Russia, McCarthyite Hollywood, and post 9/11 New York as the secret lives of 2 gay composers are uncovered. So in this first section, we're with Sergei in 1940. So Sergei has been sent to a Siberian labor camp. So Soviet composer Sergei Grekov is working on the Kotlas to Vorkuta railway line. Today, he has been sent out in search of timber, and after a violent disagreement with his teammate, he finds himself hiding in a tree.
You can't stay up there forever, Orlov says. We may as well get this over and done with. Why are you drawing this out? It must be agony for you. I won't come down, says Sergei. Not till you've gone. I'm going nowhere, says Orlov. Where would I go? Listen, even if you tell them I slipped and fell or drowned, they'll still punish you. Put you on pumping duty, cut your rations in half. Rations? Says Orlov. I don't have my own rations. It takes a second for Sergei to understand. His stomach clenches. He puts one hand over his mouth. A sour mix of bile and half-digested toast spills up onto his tongue, burning his throat. He's heard the stories. Escapees who take along an extra person for when their food supplies run out. Bones found in the woods. Then I won't come down, he says. You'll have to wait until I fall or die of thirst. Orlov begins pacing around the tree, stamping his feet and clapping his hands together to keep warm. He sits for a while, his head craned back, staring up at Sergei with an imbecilic grin like some village idiot, occasionally laughing to himself. Something in him has snapped, that much is clear. Perhaps he's stuck like this, a murderous, overgrown child. Plenty of men go mad out here, but never like this. In the distance, their fire grows dim, eventually dying out altogether. The grey smoke drifts across the forest through the falling snow. Orlov remains beneath the tree. Sergei could jump, leap off the branch and onto Orlov, and while Orlov is dazed, he could take away his axe and give him a swift blow to the top of the head, dead in an instant. Does he have it in him to kill a man? Does he even have it in him to take the axe from him? And what if he missed Orlov altogether and hit the ground feet first? He'd break his legs. No running away then. Time passes. Holding on to the tree is hard work. The snow melts around his body, making the branches slippery. If Orlov could just fall asleep, if only for a moment, it might give him enough time to run. He can remember his way back to the path, he's certain of it. Movement below. Orlov getting to his feet, still chuckling to himself. He holds up his axe for Sergei to see. "Idiot," he says. "I've been an idiot." His first blow makes barely a dent in the tree, but the second is powerful enough for Sergei to feel it. "Please," he says, "Orlov, you don't have to do this." Orlov swings again, taking another sliver from the trunk, and Sergei closes his eyes and clings on more tightly than before. What a ridiculous way to die, hacked to death by the camp clown, the butt of everyone's jokes. And they would even joke about this, the other prisoners. Orlov would come back alone and they would say to him, "What happened to Grekov? Did you eat him?" The shadows of the forest floor play tricks with him. Myriad colours dancing in the dark till the blackness seems to swirl and move of its own accord. Orlov takes another swing and something splinters. If the tree falls, let it fall on Orlov. Even if it kills me too, let us both die out here. Orlov is readying himself to strike the tree again, when something heavy crunches down into the snow behind him. He pauses, each silvery breath drifting towards something massive and dark only a few feet away. Another powdery whump as the immense dark form takes another lumbering step towards him. "Oh God," Orlov mutters, almost too quietly for Sergei to hear. The bear moves slowly. It should be hibernating, but is still too fast for Orlov. In 2 short bounds it has him, charging into him and slamming him into the snow. The tree shakes and Orlov screams, unguarded, shrill, silenced only when the bear bites down and tears away his head. Blood splashes against the tree and the snow around it turns black. Orlov's body flails about beneath the bear, the flesh stripped from its arms and legs, a steaming cavity opened up in the torso. Sergei wants to look away, but he can't. Orlov's head remains almost unscathed, and his dead eyes glare skyward as the rest of him gets eaten. Nearby, sharp teeth connect with hollow-sounding bones. The bear grunts and paws at something wet. It heaves its massive bulk around and licks the blood from Orlov's face before dissolving almost silently into the night. For 3 more hours, Sergei waits in the tree. The bear may have had its fill, but it could still be lurking nearby. His hands burn with the cold. He's straddling a branch, his chest and stomach flat against the tree, and he wraps his arms around the trunk, stuffing each hand into the opposite sleeve to warm them and to form a kind of clasp. He can just about reach. It wouldn't have taken very long for Orlov to cut it down. Melting snow has begun to seep in through his trousers, freezing again in shards of ice that are moulded around his legs. He rests his head against the damp bark. If he were to doze off, even for a second, there's a chance he would fall, hitting every branch on the way down. His feet are beginning to tingle and his arms are beginning to ache. He can't stay here all night. Above the trees, the sky grows darker still. The snow stops falling, and the clouds part to reveal a dense spray of stars. Out of nowhere, a thin green ribbon of light trails across the sky, widening and pulsing with life till it resembles a vast flowing curtain suspended over the taiga. Presently it lights up the whole forest, and the shadows of the trees wheel giddily on the forest floor like compass needles. He never imagined he would see this with his own eyes. There is something miraculous in those lights, transcending this cold, dark forest and Orlov's butchered corpse, and the knapsack of tools and grubby soup tins now buried in the snow. The material things of this world no longer matter to him, and he hardly dares to make a sound, afraid that by doing so he could break the spell and stop the coloured lights from happening. This is the most beautiful thing he has ever seen. Mahler's Urlicht. That's what he can hear. A piece he hasn't listened to in so long, yet he remembers it entirely. Every note, every nuance, kept pristine, complete, in a place the camp guards can't get to it. Perhaps there will be a life after this. The walk back to the base camp takes him 3 hours. In places, the snow is 2 feet deeper than it was this morning. His body feels raw. His lips and knuckles are beginning to crack. He wonders what on earth he is going back to, and whether it could possibly be worth it. The instinct to survive was never rational. He returns to the camp and his brigadier, empty-handed but for his tools. He tells him that Orlov was killed by a bear and that he spent much of the day hiding in a tree. He doesn't tell him the exact circumstances of Orlov's death or the green lights that he saw. The brigadier strikes Orlov's name from his ledger and tells Sergei he'll receive only a half ration of bread tomorrow and the day after. It will be another 14 months before they reach Vorkuta.
Wow. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the second reading.
We'll do the second one straight away. Okay.
You want to? Yeah, I was thinking that.
Yeah, no, good. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that we would do your readings and then we'd move on to the chat.
Okay.
It does feel intense because there's so much
Well, the next one's quite different.
very different, and you know, immediately you get a sense of the scale of the novel and the range of the novel in this sense. It's a novel that really ranges across the whole 20th century, so you might feel somewhat vertiginous now as we swing round. Sam's gonna.
What are you going to say? What are you going to say about the second one?
I'm going to say that we're in Indian Springs. This is Nevada area. Give me a thumbs up, David. Yeah, in 1951. So Saul Conrad, a Hollywood composer working for a studio. He is a married man, but he and his former lover Nick have taken a road trip together. This is to Nevada to witness something spectacular. Yeah, which sounds like a good too.
The bomb is scheduled for the early hours, and with nothing else to do, the two of you dress and leave your room as planned, but this time you're not alone. There are other guests staying at the Cheyenne Motel, and together you form a strange procession marching out across the dunes. The others, perhaps 20 in all, talk excitedly amongst themselves, but you and Nick say nothing to one another, speaking only when spoken to. Say, where are you boys from? Los Angeles. Hear that, kids? These fellas came from Los Angeles. We drove down from Park City. You know Utah Toll? I don't, sorry. Took us, say, Alice, how long would you say it took us to drive here? 7 hours? 7 hours, maybe more. And let me tell you, it is one heck of a lot colder in Park City. Oh, boy. The winter's there. We still got snow on the ground that'll come up to your knees. This is like summer to us. Ain't that right, Alice? That's right. But we just had to see this. I mean, it is a miracle of technology. And Alice and I, well, we've spoken about it, and we both said, haven't we? We sleep easier in our beds knowing we have the bomb and the other fellas don't. Either of you fellas see any action? You both shake your head. Nick was too young, of course. And you're sick and tired of saying 4Fs, so you'll just leave a man from Utah to draw his own conclusions. Well, I was on Guadalcanal, he says. And I do not want my boys to experience anything like that. No, sir, I just do not understand why we haven't deployed it in Korea. How many thousand dead? Those lives could have been saved if we'd dropped just one of those here bombs on these communists. George, Alice, we've spoken about this. Presently, the crowd stops on a ridge 200 yards from the motel, facing west. Some brought fold-away chairs and cushions. Some of the men have bottles of beer. Tired children yawn and rub their eyes. No one quite knows what they're about to witness. The time given for the test was approximate, and so you wait, staring into the silent black, hardly daring to blink in case you miss something, as if it could all be over in a split second. A nearby family brought a picnic hamper, and the mother begins laying out plates and Tupperware boxes on a tartan blanket. The initial excitement dies down and a kind of ambient, pervasive tedium sets in. Men check their wristwatches, women keep tired children entertained. Then carried on the breeze, a distant siren, like a baying animal. Not one siren, but several, or perhaps its echo, overlapping. A pack of these immense, unknowable creatures, howling in the desert. Nick looks at you, his eyes glistening, and with an expression somewhere between hatred and undiminished love, he whispers, "You know, you really broke my heart." His timing is almost biblical. The light from the west, so sudden, so brilliant, it turns everything into a blank page. You screw your eyes shut and put your arm across your face, but you can still see it, that light. An orange glow that permeates every skin cell, every blood cell, even your bones. When you open your eyes again, a globe of fire is forming over the horizon, turning the night sky a deep and bloody shade of red. It swells and churns, flaring yellow and white in its core, gorging itself on light. Nick can't take his eyes off it, and you watch a single tear escape and trickle down his cheek. "It's beautiful," he says. You look again as a cloud shaped like an oak tree rises and blooms over the desert and the craggy hills. The crowd around you oohs and ahs as if they were watching fireworks. One of the younger children, a little girl, begins to cry. You know exactly how she feels.
Thank you. Wow. Thanks so much, Sam. Round of applause for Sam.
Do you want to go on? Do you want to go on to the third one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would really love to. You could. That's so amazing that you've done that, and that's so wonderful to hear that brought to life in that way. I mean, it's such a rich novel, and for that reason, I did try and push my luck massively and ask Sam if he might read one of the pieces that's about the music in the novel, because a lot of people getting in touch before this event really wanted to ask David about the music in the novel. So we are going to go to this reading now, which is Soul. He's agreed. He's at the Carnegie Hall in New York in 1951, and Sol has agreed to conduct a piece of music from the Inferno Oratorio, which was written by his late mentor and one-time partner, Ronald Bernard, who's no longer alive. And we will hopefully enjoy this reading now from Sam.
The auditorium falls silent. Someone, perhaps 100 feet above and behind you, clears his throat. One of the cellists shifts in his seat, and the stage beneath him creaks. You breathe in deeply, close your eyes, and you begin. This isn't, of course, the first time you've heard it. It's not even the first time you've heard it today. Even so, the sound of the choir causes you to lose focus, if only for a second, and the flesh along your arms and shoulders becomes taut with goose flesh. You can feel the paper of that first draft score as you turned its pages. You can see Ron's expression, looking at you from across the desk, waiting for your verdict and your understanding. "It's incredible," you said. "Simply incredible." The first performance in Boston. Outside the concert hall, the rain fell in silver pinstripes and the puddles were inches deep. By the time you took to your seat in the front row, you were drenched. Margaret Bernard was there. This was long before the separation, placed as far from you as possible. She didn't notice those moments when her husband, sitting beside her, glanced across at you and smiled. The choir sings Dante's words and the orchestra plays Ran's music. This is what the absence of genius feels like, and how it will always feel. Ran was the one who could write music fit for Dante. For you, such confidence was impossible, until you saw the sky burst into flames above the scrublands of southern Nevada. Ran's music, written after the obliteration of cities and the liberation of the death camps, was never concerned solely with a medieval hell. It was as much about the hell we make for ourselves and others here on earth. The hell of wars and massacres, the hell of jealousies and betrayals. The choir sings, Io non mori e non rimasi vivo. I did not die, and I was not alive. You're holding Nick, trying and failing to lift him out of the water. His skin cold and soft and horribly like butchered meat. This is what death feels like. Soft but cold. No life, no tension behind it. The flesh giving way, giving up, submitting to whatever comes next. You're wrapping a veal cutlet behind the counter of your father's shop. A Western Union van pulls up outside. Your father stares at the van but says nothing. Your mother steps out from the storeroom and makes a sound in the back of her throat, neither a cry nor a gasp. The bell above the door jangles and the Western Union man enters and asks for Yitzhak Cohen. He hands your father the telegram and apologizes as if it could possibly be his fault. He leaves the store with the expression of a man not yet numbed by being the bearer of bad news. Your mother begins to cry, doesn't even have to read the telegram. You take it from your father's shaking hands and read it, picking out only your brother's name and those words that burst from the page before coalescing into a single inescapable fact. This music was always there, beneath each moment, long before Ron wrote it. The choir's voices fill the auditorium, transforming it into a space without gravity. And you are watching an event that occurs almost a mile above the desert, a single atom shattering, triggering a series of events that fills the night with fire. This isn't a moment of destruction, but rather an act of terrifying creation, another sun being born, and living only a fraction of a second before consuming itself into nothing but dust. If you took the sound of that moment and drew it out over minutes rather than millionths of a second, what you would hear is the Inferno Oratorio, sung by a 100-strong choir.
Thank you. I can hear cacophonous. They're all on mute until later.
Never mind.
But thank you so much to Samuel. And you may leave.
I'm sorry, guys, I have to go.
Yeah.
Children at bedtime and everything. But thank you so much for letting me share that with you. And David, what a real pleasure. It's brilliant stuff. Speak to you soon.
Thank you so much. So, yes, David Llewellyn, the author of those words, and of the novel A Simple Scale. Let me just get my notes up so I can talk to him about it. Yes, it's interesting actually. So David's work is very varied, let's say. So he's written, I think, 4 novels published by Seren. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. And then more novels published by other publishers such as BBC Books, which, for example, in the Torchwood series, mm-hmm. So we're talking about a novel here that has a huge range in it, but also David's work, and this will probably come out a bit more in our chat, but that sense of someone who's working in Hollywood who has a real you know, genius of the craft, let's say. You know, David is someone who is working in lots of different genres himself, and it won't surprise you, I think, after that brilliant enactment then of this novel, that David's also a dramatist. And in fact, you, I think, can hear Samuel West performing in a Doctor Who audio drama written by David. Is that correct? And it's called Serpent in the Silver Mask. And that, I think it's not available on Audible at the moment, but it is available via the website Big Finish, and they produce lots of audio dramas. And David has told me a little about Samuel's performance in that, and I really want to listen to it now, so I'm looking forward to that.
He's very funny in it. He's very, very funny in it. So, yeah.
Now, let me get my questions. There we go. Yeah, so David,
Yeah.
and this novel, A Simple Scale, actually, I should say to everyone, shortlisted for the Polari Prize in 2019. That's right, isn't it? So huge congratulations for that, David. And yeah, fantastic reviews. So I think that we've all got a lovely 30% discount on the Seren Books website at the moment, so we can flock to get David's other novels, which are very different, but similarly, if you've got a little sense of, it was so difficult to choose bits for the reading tonight, because the novel really, as you can hear, probably had a sense of that. Actually, the dialogue there with the guy from Utah, I mean, I knew that Sam would do that so brilliantly, and it was great. And there are also sections in Hollywood with this fantastic kind of screwball style dialogue, very witty, this kind of sense of that ferocious American wit and intelligence, which David really captures. And you're fantastic with that. I mean, looking through David's other novels published by Seren, I've just been struck by the dialogue, so fast, so witty, you know, and it's no surprise that David was snapped up as a dramatist in that way, and has written many other things, including an audio drama based on the life of a young Cicero. So that's something I've also been enjoying. So we'll get on to let's just start for a moment. As you heard then, as you got a sense, and wow, I realised what we'd asked Sam to do in going between those two bits very swiftly, but it is technically so difficult to pull off structuring a novel, a story that goes back and forward in time like that between different characters, so multiple different characters. You know, it's not an excessively long novel here that we've got, and so you do it with such economy. And as I was saying to you the other day, you go so deep so quickly into these characters. I mean, I was noting down things even as Sam was reading then about, for example, the instinct to survive never made sense. You've just managed to do these things with even a small sentence that just drives you so deep into someone's thoughts, that's so skillful and impressive and enjoyable that, you know, this is why when I read the novel again, it was completely fresh to me. So Natalie is a character I mentioned at the beginning. So Natalie is an English young woman living in freshly, like October 2001, so just after 9/11. She and Sergei's grandson sort of come together to bring the two strands of the novel together. So she's such a rounded character immediately within her own right. And I just wondered, you know, I wanted you to perhaps to tell us a little bit about the challenges of structuring a novel that moves between different periods, different characters in that way. And perhaps then also why that character of Natalie was something that you hit on then, and perhaps what she meant to you. Because, I think this is the thing, is that this kind of every character in this novel is given respect, which really speaks to the themes of the novel, especially about people being forgotten and sort of swept into the, you know, the tides of history, you know, just kind of forgotten people, as it were, potentially. So every character, you seem to have this kind of ethical function in the novel, that every character is given such respect and depth of characterization.
I think that kind of came out from repeated drafts. I don't know whether that was always there, because I think certainly Natalie's character took quite a lot of work to get right, because I think there were various drafts where her kind of mentality and outlook were completely different, and it just didn't quite gel. And so she took a lot of work to make her a more I think that I sent off an early draft to a friend, funnily enough, in New York, just mainly to get his kind of, to make sure I was doing New York right in it, and so on. But he just said, "Oh, I'm not sure about her. I'm not sure about her." And so I really had to put a lot of work, and he gave me some helpful notes, and I put a lot of work then into trying to get her moral dilemma right. I always knew kind of how it would end, roughly, but there were various versions of how that would end. And I think I ended up, the very last chapter that she's in was written, I think, and you were helping me work on it at the time, but I think it was written kind of about 2 months before it went to print or something, after several years of writing it. So I was still doing work on her character right up until the end, I think. But funnily enough, the story kind of started with her character. Originally, it was only going to be those contemporary bits set in New York. I always knew it was going to be set in New York, but it was. It started as a short story, and then I realized I wanted to know more about what the backstory to the piece of music it was, and how it had come to be copied in the States, but maybe to leave some of that ambiguous. And so. But yeah, the structuring of it was, I started off doing it quite mechanically and kind of planned it out and went, right, well, if we have a chapter in New York there, then the next chapter after that should be in Russia, and the one after that should be in Hollywood, and then maybe come back to New York and kind of, but then also reverse it so that it doesn't just feel too mechanical.
Absolutely.
And then after that, I did kind of just mix things up a bit, especially towards the end, where pacing became important, where it became important that it felt all like one story that was reaching a conclusion, rather than 3 stories that were maybe going off in different directions.
Yeah, it's very clever, and that's right, because if you have a novel that's moving between different periods, one is sort of alternately, it's very difficult for that not sometimes to avoid the kind of mechanical, or you're slipping in and out caring about certain characters. But I think it's, you know, this is the huge success of the novel, is that you pull that off and go so deep with the characters so quickly. And in fact, you're going forwards in time with Natalie, and you're going steadily backwards in time with the other sections of the novel. So it's very clever, but it feels so effortless. As you say, it feels very natural, and towards the end, the pacing really drives it along to the conclusion. In fact, so you have the piece of music that's so central to the novel. In fact, one of the readers, I can't see who's here tonight, because I'm sort of avoiding the screen and can't see people too much at the moment, because I'm trying to concentrate on the questions. But Carrie Archer, who's the founder of Seren, had read the novel, and I was keen to hear what people would like to hear about or have you talk about. And one of his questions was really in terms of thinking about that piece of music. How far did the idea of musical form influence the form of this novel?
Well, I'm not coming from a musical background. You know, I don't read music. I can't play any instruments. So it was more a kind of, certainly trying to think as musically as I can without any kind of musical background. That did influence the structure of it, and I was kind of thinking, well, if we go 3 steps forward, then we go backwards, and one of the pieces is going, one of the storylines is moving backwards, and so it was there. But I don't know, I couldn't say that I wrote it musically, because it's more a kind of instinctive. Well, this is a bit like music. It's a bit like music, but it's, yeah. It was, you know, there were individual pieces of music that influenced it, but it wasn't, yeah, I can't claim that I suddenly developed this innate skill to write prose in a musical way.
But I mean, it's lovely in a way that Carey asked the question, because he's someone I was like, I wanted to know his thoughts because he knows such a lot about music, and it's lovely that he kind of is feeling, oh, you know, there must have been this structure but behind it in that sense. I mean, it will perhaps amaze some people who have read the novel that you. I mean, I then was looking up your background and I saw you'd studied at, is it Dartington Hall?
Well, Dartington College of Arts, which is no longer there. It merged on it a couple of years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, which I didn't know much about. So I looked it up and I was thinking, oh, you know, this is it. You know, David must have been some kind of musical prodigy and was there studying music. But then that wasn't the case. And one of the other questions from Catherine Stansfield was, how did you get that sense? But I suppose really what you're conveying, David, is the emotion of the music, the feeling of the music, and you do that so powerfully. And well, I suppose the image is involved in that last reading that Sam did. You brought in an image and a feeling, which, you know, I think in a novel that really reaches across the 20th century in that way, you know, these huge historical events, symbolically thereby testing the atomic bomb in the desert. You feel the impact of these things on people's everyday lives, and I suppose that in Natalie as well, you feel her discombobulation being in New York at that time, feeling a kind of sense of the pressure of the world in some sense, and I suppose also that structure of the novel, you have that sense you're in New York post 9/11, and the other aspects of your novel kind of remind you as the reader that there's always something else in some other part of the world. So I was thinking of that, the kind of atom effect that you refer to in that last bit that Sam was reading, this sort of sense of things, the butterfly effect throughout the world of actions, I suppose, in some sense. But it's the feeling of the music that you capture so well. I mean, did you have a sense with this piece of music that you have Sergei's piece of music which recurs throughout, but then you also have the incredibly dramatic piece by Ron there that you write about? When you were writing that, did you have a sense of that music in your head?
And probably it was more a case of knowing which pieces of music I wanted them to be like. I think the Grekov, well, originally the title of it was going to be Grekov's March, or the Grekov March, or something like that. And I was like, no, that's no. So, but yeah, I think the Grekov March was kind of the Montagues and Capulets from Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet. So it was that kind of going for that, but also the March of Bacchus by Deleuze, which is the Knight Rider theme. If anyone's heard it, it's dun 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 dun, 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 and that's where the whole idea came from. I heard it on the radio, and I was like, "That's the Knight Rider theme." So what if this kind of cheesy 70s sci-fi show had a title, had a theme tune that came from some classical piece of music that people had maybe forgotten? So that kind of came from that. I don't know about the Dante oratorio. That was probably a bit of kind of Carmina Burana and things like that, and trying to think of those kind of pieces which have got, get used on adverts and the X Factor and what have you. It's that kind of, bombastic choral music. So but I couldn't have come up with my own Dante oratorio in my head.
Imagine you could. Like, I've just got to explain this to describe this to someone, and they can notate it.
But I think the writing about it then, the main influence on there, I think, and I didn't realize it until after I'd kind of written it, was Peter Schaffer, and it's Amadeus. And it's both the stage play and the film, which are very different, but there's huge chunks of dialogue which cross over from stage to screen. And the way Salieri talks about music, and it was instantly, I watched that film probably when I was about 8 or 9, and instantly I got what he was talking about, because it just makes it this universal emotional experience in relation to music that isn't necessarily technical. It's not technobabble, because I read other writers writing about classical music and it feels like they're just showing off their research, and I didn't want to do that. Anything I'd read, I consulted a few people. I've got a friend of mine, Luke Whitlock, who's a composer, who I asked him, I said, right, can you tell me why Knight Rider sounds like the March of Bacchus? And so he talked me through it, and I just basically almost copied what he'd said word for word. And it was only a few lines, you know, it was less than a paragraph of him just saying what it was. But I just used that, you kind of copy and pasted it over, just so that there's a few lines that explain why the two pieces are similar. And I just that's just kind of for verisimilitude, you know, that's just there for to give a hint of authenticity. But then the descriptions of emotional reactions to music is just kind of me writing my emotional reactions to music, or, you know, kind of, yeah. So if that's more personal, that side of it is probably more personal.
Yes, like for example, the Schubert I can think of. I mean, we were saying earlier it would have been so nice actually now to listen to some of the music, but that we may be able to link at a later stage some of the music that influenced you when you were thinking about it.
I've got a playlist here somewhere.
Great to do that. You can post that on the Seren website at a later point. Yeah, so moving to think about the kind of the sections with soul. So Sam read a couple of the sections there. You chose then to use the second person. So the you know, you come into the room, etc. What was the thinking behind that, and have you used somewhere else that you thought this is very effective?
I have read stuff. I think is it Bright Lights, Bright City? I think is, but that was years ago. I read that about 20 odd years ago. But no, I think when I wrote the first draft, those bits were actually written as a screenplay. So halfway through, and it was too jarring. It kind of worked, and I think it's what makes the dialogue quite snappy in those scenes. The first written is just almost purely dialogue. And then I realised, no, I wanted to get into Saul's head at the time, and how could I do that in a way that would, because Natalie's scenes are past tense third person, I think. But yeah, past tense third person. Then Sergei's sequences are present tense third person. So it's got to be something different again to try and make people, so that people know where they are, partly. So yeah, and I started doing it in third person, and it just, that lent itself to the kind of immediacy of those chapters, I think. But yeah, it was a case of just trying to make it so that it was fairly clearly delineated. I didn't want people to be completely lost if they went from a chapter that was in Russia to a chapter that's in Hollywood, and especially considering one's going one direction, one's going the other direction. So yeah, so it was that was kind of tricky, but it took a couple of drafts, and then I went, yeah, write it in second person rather than.
It works so well because I think it manages to kind of convey that the cinematic. Somehow it seems to invoke that, and I think the fact that Sam then read it with the American accent was exactly right, because that's how it reads on the page, isn't it? And it kind of has that almost slightly hard-boiled edge to it, you know, of the dialogue. So
well, I always think it's kind of Saul talking to himself almost. It's that he is the voice, but he's kind of walking himself through these events from his life, and he's such an evasive character. He kind of runs away from things and avoids things and hides things and keeps things secret. So it's him kind of going through the bits of his life that he doesn't like talking about, maybe, or doesn't like admitting to, or whatever. So yeah, but it felt natural. It felt, once I started doing it that way, it did feel like the right way to tell his part of the story.
That's an interesting thing to follow up on, because I think one of the main aspects of the novel really is this sense of betrayal. So how people can betray, hide things from other people, and out, you know, drop other people in it. So that sort of theme of betrayal within the novel, I wonder if you'd like to talk about the significance of that and what you were.
That was a theme that kind of emerged once, and again, it's one of these things that kind of comes maybe later in the process, where you've got all the furniture in place, or you've got all the scaffolding in place, or whatever. And I knew who the characters were, and it just did kind of emerge. And as I was doing a bit of research into, I mean, I'd read Dante's Inferno. I knew that there was this Judica, which is the circle where the people who betray their benefactors are sent to. So it's where Judas is, and so on. And I found that really interesting, because that's also kind of tied up into that Renaissance anti-Semitism and so on. And I thought, if he, so it's a bit too complicated to go into here, but yeah, it's so those themes just kind of came up from, maybe that was the starting point when I realized that Judica is the place where people who betray their benefactors go. Ron has written this piece of music as a kind of point. He's trying to make a point with it, but it's also tied up in their relationship. But then actually those themes kind of surfaced elsewhere as well within Natalie's story. And so, yeah, I guess once you realize, I don't think, well, I don't tend to realize necessarily what the themes are when I start something. And then maybe there are themes that people will notice and that I never thought about. But with that, certainly that was one that came up. But it took a while. It took a while to that. See, I don't want to give the ending away, but obviously I knew there was betrayal as an idea in there. But yeah, it really kind of became more of a driving force, I think.
Yeah. The Mozart and Salieri. Obviously, so the title eventually came from the Pushkin theme.
Yeah.
So and then, but obviously you were going back from that, having been introduced to Amadeus, which was obviously quite formative for you in some ways.
Well, certainly, I mean, just in film terms, but I hadn't realised it. And again, this was something I didn't kind of realise while I was writing it. But I watched it again after I'd finished writing it and thought, oh God, yeah, that's kind of where some of the ways of writing about music came from. But yeah,
I mean, it's such a wonderful film. I mean, it's one that I always go back to again and again.
It's in my top 10. I think it's definitely in my top 10. But yeah, and I think I read the play, not thinking of it in connection with, not the play of Amadeus, sorry, it's Mozart and Salieri by Pushkin. So I read that after reading Yevgeny Onegin. And while I was reading it, it's some of the opening lines. He says that, the thing about there's no justice in heaven or earth, or something. The truth is as clear as a simple scale. That's what he says. And I just read that and went, oh God, I like that. Because in English, it's got the balance of there's no justice in heaven or earth, and it's a simple scale, and you've got the scales of justice. But it might even be more nuanced in the English than it is in the Russian. I don't speak that much Russian. So. Yeah, so that's how kind of the title came about. So it kind of came full circle, really.
Well, I know that maybe we should aim to open it up in a minute to others. I'm going to try and open my screen up so I can see if Catherine is. I'm not sure if she is actually Catherine. Oh yes, Catherine. Can we let Catherine ask her questions, because actually they follow on very naturally from where we just left off, really.
Can I see?
I think Sarah can unmute you. Here you are.
Yes, I've been told I can now unmute myself. What a thing to hear. So thank you, David. It's really, really interesting. It's really fascinating to talk about the novel, which I admire greatly. And yeah, I did send some questions to Nemonie in advance, and we've covered some of them. Particularly, my astonishment that you're not musical yourself in a practical sense. I'm just astonished. You could totally have told us you were. We'd have all believed you, I'm sure. I was really interested, I think, particularly in the structure of the novel. How obviously you said it started life in some ways as a short story, and then you decided you wanted to unearth some of the things that the story brought up. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about whether or not you did you write the sort of narrative strands complete in themselves and then divvy them up, or did you sort of write a bit of one and then a bit of the other, and it was more impressionistic?
No, I wrote it, as I did sort of mention earlier, that I kind of mapped it out a little bit. I knew what the stories were, but I kind of mapped it out in terms of the order I wanted to tell things. So no, it was quite kind of, yeah, I wrote it in the order that the chapters are. You know, it was done like that. Because what I found was I would discover things while writing one character's story that influenced the other, and so they kind of fed into each other, and I think it felt more cohesive. I think if I tried writing them separately, maybe they wouldn't have gelled. I don't know. but yeah, no, it was written in the order that it is in the book, more or less. I think there were a couple of sequences where maybe I changed things, or I can't remember now. It's years, but yeah, so there were bits that were probably written and added in later. I'd have to go through every old draft of it, of which there are many. So
don't never look back. I tend to think these things. But
old stuff or something. So yeah.
Well, that's really interesting to think about. That idea of the different strands sort of growing with each other and into each other.
Yeah, I think definitely.
Yeah, you can feel that in the novel. I think the organicness of it is tremendous. So yeah, that was my sort of main question that we haven't covered. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
I think Jeremy actually was. I wanted to ask some questions about the research, which I know that David's got some interesting answers to, and so maybe he was. I think Jeremy.
I think I can see him.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Hello, Bob.
Hi.
Fine, thank you. Well, it's been quite interesting hear you talk about the novel and kind of Dante, because there's a real thread of the kind of the Divine Comedy going through the book. Now you look at it, you like the kind of the realms of ice, the realms of fire, woods and the woods of suicides and stuff like that. So my question really was about, for me, Nick's suicide was a real shock, and it kind of, for me, it felt like a pivotal moment in the novel where I lost a lot of sympathy for Sal. So I just wondered how you went about researching that idea of suicide in a novel.
Well, I mean, some of that actually is very personal. Even though Nick is a kind of supporting character, he's not one of the main trio of characters in it. I've had depression for most of my adult life, and it's kind of just chronic, and I take medication for it, and I'm fine. But it's always been there, and as has suicide ideation and so on. So that's always been part of it. So it wasn't difficult to get into. It wasn't difficult to get into Nick's head. As for going to that extent, I mean, it was trying to find a way of describing it in a way that is emotionally real, emotionally authentic. But I didn't. Yeah, obviously you don't want it to be gratuitous, and you don't want it to be romanticized, and you don't want it to be all those kind of things. So no, it was a difficult scene to write, but it was important to it. And for the reason you said, really, it's that this is where you have to have doubts about Saul and about his moral integrity and about who he is, because I think, yeah, he's a difficult person. I think and there's a reason why he's ended up on his own at the end of his, towards the end of his life, and that Natalie is really the only person he's got kind of sticking up for him by that point. And I think that it's all those kind of things. So, but I think it was important that we see that what he's capable of to a certain extent, so that some mysteries remain open at the end of the book, but you can kind of draw whatever conclusions you like from them because you know what he's like. Yeah. So yeah, does that make sense? Sorry, does that?
Yeah, yes, it does. For me, it rings true as well. And it's quite interesting. There's a new Netflix series, Hollywood, which kind of covers some of that sort of sex trade in that time.
Yeah.
But done in a very different way, almost a very glib way. Whereas I thought how you approached that with Nick was very gritty.
That was based on a lot of different reading about people like Scotty Bowers and people like that. So some of the locations that are mentioned in there come from his memoirs. But oh God, I'm trying to think what else I read for that. But there is a lot of writing on, kind of gay and lesbian and the kind of queer Hollywood behind the scenes. There's a lot of excellent writing on that, really, which is kind of terrifying and funny occasionally and all the rest of it. So you do get a kind of rounded picture of it. But I did try hard to make those bits quite believable, I think, rather than it just being a kind of glamorized things. Sorry.
Tell us a little bit about your research as well around the sort of 2001 period, because there was an interesting bit of, just to give us an indication of how deep you go, as it were. So
well, I mean, most of it was a combination of kind of reading, talking to friends who lived over there and or still live over there. And but one of the things I was interested in was finding out that I wanted Sol and Natalie to go to a concert, or to have been to a concert just before the novel started. And it turned out the address I'd picked for Sol, which I think is 73rd Street, is just around the corner from the Frick Collection, which is a gallery in New York, in Central Park. And it has a concert hall in it. So I messaged, now hang on, I've forgotten her name again, but I've got it written down somewhere. Oh, Joyce Bodig at the Frick Collection's concert hall. I emailed her and said, oh, do you happen to know what was the first concert that was played there after 9/11? And it was Christine Gerhardt singing Spannengesang. And so, but I thought she would just kind of leave it at the bare bones of it. But she was there at the time, and she was there at the concert, so she was able to tell me what the atmosphere there was like. She said, it was really charged, and people were crying. It was quite emotional, and so things like that were wonderful, just really helpful, because if you're a writer, you should be able to write anything set anywhere. You shouldn't be limited to what's on your doorstep. Write what's on your doorstep if you want to, but by all means, but you shouldn't be limited to that. So it is useful if you can talk to people who've been in some of these situations, especially if they're real, genuine, real life events and so on. Obviously, that wasn't possible with the sequences set in the Soviet Union, because I don't know any Gulag survivors. I don't know how I would get in touch with them. But one of the things that was excellent was Anne Applebaum, as well as writing a history of the Gulags, also compiled a book of oral testimony. It's an oral history of it. And they were brilliant. And there was a cartoonist who did really quite graphic and quite upsetting cartoons based on his time. And I think actually he was a guard. I don't think he was, I can't remember his name now, but I think it was a guard rather than a prisoner there, but had been horrified by what he saw. And so things like that were very useful, because you got the kind of unedited, un-Hollywoodized version of those events. So it was a lot of reading, but occasionally, you get to somebody nice like Joyce Bodig at the Frick Collection to give you a detailed account of.
And those things can end up being the absolute making of it, because it is a novel that's filled with wonderful elements of detail like that, and really striking observations about human nature. I was just scribbling down even as Sam was reading again, having read it before. So that's all absolutely fantastic. I suppose I should open it out a little and see if there are any questions now from anyone who's joined us tonight. I don't know if anyone can indicate that either via the chat to Sarah or by raising your hand. I don't know, I can't see that well. Oh, you can now unmute yourselves, apparently. There was one interesting thing. It's just, I feel like we should have the David Llewellyn playlist for this but also the reading list was good as well, because there was that you were reading, but just the texture. I think this seed might have been planted a long time ago by a teacher who gave you a copy of Solzhenitsyn. Is that right?
Yeah, well, she recommended, it was my English teacher, Mrs. Kelly, who I don't think she's watching tonight, but she will probably see it because we're still friends on Facebook and stuff. But she suggested I read One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. I can't remember what made her recommend that, but so she dug a copy out of the storeroom or the school library and gave it to me. And I read it and absolutely loved it, and immediately tried writing my own Gulag story when I was about 13 or 14 or whatever, which is probably terrible. But yeah, but I knew I always wanted to write something in that setting, or look into it more, or research it more, or whatever. And that finally kind of happened. But I made a point of not reading Solzhenitsyn again, because I didn't. Even though he's written kind of more extensively than pretty much any other author about that experience, I just thought, no, I don't want to be borrowing from him specifically, because he is the literary figurehead of that, and I would rather avoid comparisons if possible, but also just avoid nicking anything off him, just because sometimes it happens subconsciously, So I think you have to be aware of that. But yeah, so it was mostly reading non-fiction stuff, but it was also things like, we were talking earlier about Akhmatova, Anna Akhmatova, who's a Soviet-era poet, who, and her poetry kind of goes through various stages, because she lived a reasonably long life, and yeah, so you get kind of early lighter poems, and then you get the kind of darker poems, and then you get poems that are reflecting on the Soviet experience. So she was very useful. Her work was very useful for kind of understanding the world that these characters lived in, I think.
That's fantastic. Well, and I heartily recommend the novel if anyone's joining tonight, having enjoyed David's other work and yet to get to this novel. Where do you feel like it sits now with your other novels? Because there's such a range of them, and you haven't actually been going on about the fact that you've previously written a novel that featured the game show Lockdown. I haven't seen you trying to cash in on that, David.
It's about a tabloid journalist who puts himself into self-isolation because he thinks there's a disease of madness going around.
Has Seren been tweeting about this?
Because I picked it up the one day and looked at it and went, oh my God, yeah, the game show, the reality show in it is called Lockdown, and it's where everyone's in prison. So, yeah, that's scary. That was 2008, I think that came out. I was 30, yeah, so it's a while ago. Set in the near future year of 2010. But
I think those early novels just really show off your brilliance with the dialogue and the wit and everything. And I think that you've obviously had that ambition very early, even if you've just read Solzhenitsyn at school, to try and start writing your own Gulag story. So the ambition was already there.
Oh no, it was definitely there. I was
very excited to see where it takes you next. But I think I've gone over the time.
Oh God,
quite a lot, so I don't want to keep. But we should probably say a big thank you as well to Sarah for working so hard to organise all of. I
wouldn't have had a clue. I was there earlier. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I hope everyone really enjoyed that and really enjoyed the readings. Oh, it just sounded fantastic.
Yeah,
it was a great. Thank you very much to David for joining us, and to Nemonie for hosting for us and organising Samuel West. I think that definitely added a whole other level to this event. So thank you both very much.